Hello and good afternoon. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women who are working to save historic places. Thank you to our series sponsor of Women in Preservation, DMX Architecture of Fayetteville, for their generous support. Many of you are members of Preserve Arkansas, and we thank you for that. If you're not already a member, I'd like to invite you to formally join us for as little as $50 a year. Your memberships provide vital support to Preserve Arkansas and allow us to achieve our mission of saving Arkansas's historic places. You may learn more and become a member at preservearkansas.org. You're invited to our annual membership meeting this Saturday, October 12th. This year's membership meeting takes place at the Clayton House in Fort Smith's Belle Grove Historic District. Join us for brunch, bubbles, and a brief business meeting, and catch up with preservationists from throughout the state. You may learn more and RSVP on our website at preservearkansas.org. And you don't want to miss our Preservation Ramble coming up in a few weeks. We're headed to Southeast Arkansas on Saturday, November the 9th. Learn more and get your tickets before the bus fills up at preservearkansas.org. Join us again on November the 12th for a talk by Elizabeth Norton of Mount Judy, Arkansas. Elizabeth and her late husband, Wendell, founded Norton Arts, a company that specializes in the conservation of fine and historic works of art and architecture. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker and my good friend, Kathy Boyette. Kathy is a past president of Preserve Arkansas's Board of Directors and a longtime member of the Ouachita County Historical Society, who has worked tirelessly to advance the cause of historic preservation in her community and across the state. Welcome, Kathy. Okay, I see you, Kathy.
Hey, it's good to
You're
see
live.
you too.
Hello.
All right. Let me get my, oh shoot.
You just screen share over me.
Over you. Okay, good. I needed permission. Okay.
There you go. You look good.
All right.
I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. She did say she was my friend, you know. That's so I was really excited when they asked me to do this. I felt like maybe they lost their minds, but I know how hard it is to find good people. And so I said, sure, I'd love to do it. And I named my presentation Volunteer Preservationist, but the more I went back and kind of worked through where I started and what I've been doing, I think it needs to say accidental preservationist, because sometimes I wonder how I got into this, and I want to tell you, if you ever do, it's difficult to get out. You just, every time you turn around, you see something new that you'd like to do or that needs to be done. And I'm actually, like so many people in local organizations, I'm just a volunteer. I never had a paying job with the Historical Society or anywhere involved with historical things, but I've always loved history. My mother was an avid reader, and every week she would haul us with her to the library, and we'd all get a pile of books. And after I finished reading all the children's books, I started reading history. I particularly like English and Egyptian history. In fact, I decided I wanted to be, my first career, I wanted to be an archaeologist. That was in the 6th grade. And then in the 7th grade, I found art, and I just changed and never went back. And so later, in 1971, I graduated from Henderson University with a BSc in art. I recall when, we were in there in the labs working on projects, I had a professor that was a bit of a character. All art professors are a bit of characters. But he would come in and harass us, and he would say, I don't know why you women are pursuing an art degree. You're just gonna get married, have babies, and forget all about it. And it kind of made me mad, but I'm darned if he wasn't right. That's what I did. I did teach art for a while, but I got married, and when you get married, you generally follow the money maker, and he made more money than I did, at least some of the time. And so we pursued his jobs. So that meant I kind of wandered around a bit. And I did several things, from teaching to interior design to selling radio advertising and then selling insurance. And the last one is what got us to Camden, Arkansas, which was my husband's hometown. We started a State Farm agency there, and I worked with him, and it was kind of cool because I was an Army brat. I'd never had a hometown, and I was all in. This is going to be my place for life, and so it was going to be my hometown. And so I was involved quite a bit in the community. And when he didn't need me anymore as much, I did some short stints teaching again, and taught adjunct faculty at SAU Tech. I taught art appreciation. And if you've ever had to take that course, which I think everybody does almost to get out of college, it's kind of a glorified history course. It's art through pictures, and I mean, it's history through pictures. And so I studied history forever, and used it all the time. So when I quit working for him, I was actually doing books for him only, and being a kind of a stay-at-home mom for a while. And Townsend Mosley, who was a local historian, and Clara Freeland came to visit me one day and asked me if I would consider being the curator of the McCollum Chichester House, the building you see right in front of you. And actually, I was really fascinated. That sounded like something fun to do. And Townie was, he was a renowned Civil War expert in the state of Arkansas, and probably in other states too, because he was a collector and he knew quite a bit. And he had been the president of the Historical Society for quite a while. We met at a museum. Camden had its sesquicentennial. Do I need to pause for the fire engines? This is Fire Engine Row, by the way, and my husband had surgery today in Little Rock, so I had to move the place that I presented from my house to North Little Rock. So we may get more of that, because that's not the first one we've heard since we got here. But so Townie and Clara asked me if I would consider that, and I was kind of excited. Oddly enough, there were other curators before me, of course, and one of them was Joanne Holyfield, who was my neighbor and went to my church. And when my oldest daughter was in college, she had worked for the museum. And so the very first tour I ever had was by my own daughter when she was in college. Shortly after I started working there, we were able to, we had the volunteers that ran this historical society were smart, and they saved as much as they could of anything historic in Camden. And I'll get to that a little bit later on, but they had purchased some properties adjacent to the museum and rented them out until they all got paid for, and then they tore them down, two of them down, made a parking lot and a museum office, which meant that we could move the office that was in the kitchen of the museum down to a 2-bedroom house with a kitchen and lots of storage space. So we were able to one of the first things I was able to do is archive things. Nearly every single piece of furniture in the museum had artifacts in them, and they were in boxes or just in drawers. So they'd been there so long, some of them had wood impressions from the drawers on them. And so we were able to get those out and get them in archival storage and cataloged and all that. That was the DAR chapter helped with that project. In fact, everything that was done in this house, there was people helped with. And that's the cool thing about historical societies and small communities or even large communities that decide to save their history in their community. Camden had a lot of history because it was a city on a river. And in the early days of almost any state, rivers were more easily navigable than a lot of the roads. And so places on a river grew better than places that were not located close to waterways. And we had access to New Orleans, which was a shipping area. So Camden had a great benefit by having a port that was navigable up to the city. Further up the river, it wasn't navigable, and a lot of that changed over the years, but it was at that time, and it was a very popular place to come to. At the time of the Civil War, it was actually the second largest city in the state. A lot of people don't know that. But having all this room opened up a lot of opportunities for doing archival work. We also at that time decided to finish out the attic. There were 2 bedrooms upstairs. It's not actually the attic, it was the upstairs to the house. And there were 2 bedrooms up there, both had fireplaces, and they were used by the family at one time. And the plaster on the walls had gotten really bad, so they just closed it up. But we finished it out, cleaned it up, and put furniture back up there and interpreted it and use it on part of the tour now. So I got to be involved with that. Now, that opportunity involved hauling 5 bucket gallons of, well, they weren't empty, 5 bucket gallons of water, 5-gallon buckets of water up the stairs, very narrow. Actually, we have some visitors come to the museum and look at those stairs and say, well, I don't believe I want to see the upstairs. We videotaped it for people who can't do that. But I was younger then, hauled those buckets up there and scrubbed the heart of pine floors. The fascinating thing about this museum is that whatever room you are in, the wood boards are as long as the room. There's no piecing in them unless there's been some damage to the floors. It's amazing that this timber, this heart of pine timber, was available at that time to make boards that are as long, the wide boards, as long as each room. I scrubbed them all and got them all clean, and just like all historical societies, we don't have the money, so we just do it ourselves. My duties at first were cleaning, painting, even in our new office, we took up the carpeting, and so we sat on the floor for days and pulled staples out of the carpeting, cleaned them and made that a display area. So, and all this was work, but it was really a lot of fun. Teresa Harris and I also she's one of our local historians, and the person you call when you need to know anything and when it happened, or she'll have some kind of way to research it or at least have that information herself. And in historical societies have people like that all over. A lot of times there were genealogists, Glendale Griggs, and board members like Fred Dietrich and David Reynolds. They're really volunteer preservationists also. Nothing we accomplished at that time or during those years was done by myself. It was just with the help of all these other people. I worked as curator for about 7 years. And during that time, we also, we had a building on our property, the Leek Ingham building, we called it. Actually, we always called it the Leek Ingham Library, but it was on the National Register. It had been built downtown, and it's rare that a building is moved as many times as that one was. And it's still on the National Register. It was, or is put on the National Register. It was moved actually to save it. A small wooden building in a downtown area that was growing it was on a prime piece of property and it needed to go. And so to save it, we moved it and put it several places. And we finally moved it, turned it around and faced the street. It's a beautiful little building, and restored it. And so that's when I learned to be a grant writer. And I've done that ever since. And it's one of my favorite things to do. It's kind of a challenge. Unfortunately, it also involves a lot of paperwork after you get the grant, and that's the part I don't like. This little building served as a multi-county Freedmen's Bureau. It was first built as a lawyer's office, then after the Civil War as a Freedmen's Bureau, and later Camden's first library. And when we finished it, we were cleaning it. I had a really good friend that worked with me a lot, Octavia Taylor, and we were cleaning that building, and she was cleaning the inside of a window and I was cleaning the outside, and I was on a ladder and I looked up there and there was a name carved in the window pane up high. It was Captain N. Cole. You could barely read it, but it was, legible. And we wondered about it at that time. And years later, we had a visitor that was our program for our quarterly meeting from Old Washington, and she had transcribed all those records from the Freedmen's Bureau. And so amazing program. Something malfunctioned and she wasn't able to use her visuals or something. I can't recall what happened, but so she didn't have pictures. She just talked, and we were mesmerized. When she finished, of course, there were questions and answers, and somebody asked the question, do you know who the Union soldiers were that managed this Freedmen's Bureau? I still, to this day, don't know who she said was the manager of that bureau, but because when she said the second in command, I got chill bumps. His name was Captain Nathan Cole. And so in 1866 or so, that young man climbed up in that window and climbed. He must have been tall, or he climbed up on something and scratched his name in that window of that building. We had a really great grand opening. We held a reception for the starting of Juneteenth celebration in Camden, and we hosted a champagne reception and had speakers, and this really wonderful ceremony that they do honoring their ancestors called the libation ceremony. Great historic moment. For a while, my older sister was president of Historic Kansas City. And so I traveled with her one year with her group to the National Trust Convention in Savannah, Georgia. It was an amazing experience. I wish I had time to go to them now, but I usually don't. But their cemeteries in Savannah fascinated me. And I came home wishing we could do something with Oakland Cemetery. It's a cemetery that is on the National Register, and the Historical Society owns it. And you know what? I'm just forgetting my beautiful pictures. And that's because I can't remember how to make them go forward. Or maybe, I don't know how.
Kathy.
Yes, babe.
Hey, you can just hit the arrow.
I am, but they're not going anywhere.
Okay.
Okay.
It's okay.
You'll probably have to come in here and show me.
Okay, I will. You go on.
Okay. Oh no, you got to see the cemetery first. Okay. So where am I? Let me see it though. Okay. No. I'm hitting arrows. We've had a lot of fun with this. And we tried to do it on my computer at home. It's a good thing I came up here. We couldn't make my computer work. Oh, I'm using it. No. Oh,
So now it should work now. You just
okay.
do that. So there we go.
Let's go back. Okay. And just for a little bit, now just the arrows again. Okay, all right. See, it wasn't my fault after all. Okay. Okay, so this wonderful picture, the early days of the Daffodil Festival. When we started, um, we um, we didn't have costumes. We just wore white blouses and black skirts, but we developed a closet actually a huge room of costumes. And so we dress up our volunteers and we have such a good time. That little one in the center is two of my grandsons. Bless their heart, all three of them have had to work in the museum at one time or another. But they were dressed up and they were Chittister boys at the time. And I had to we did receptions every year and dressed up, and we had such a good time. This is our Lee Kingdom building I was telling you about. And so we got grants for this and restored it. And this is a before and this is an after. And actually, and this is our Juneteenth, that's the champagne reception that we had. It was a really well-attended event and everybody loved it. Okay, on to Oakland Cemetery. I'm sorry. I had all these great pictures, but I got excited and got past them. So, I went to the National Trust Convention in Savannah, and I thought, I wish there was something we could do in Oakland to share the history of it like they do. And I didn't go any further. I mean, we'd had an effort to restore it, and they'd done a lot of good work, but it had kind of stalled, and so we weren't doing anything. So nothing happened. I was busy until my friend Octavia that I told you about. She's a retired school teacher, and we had worked together a little bit in Camden High School, and she came in and she said, I want to start a cemetery walk. She'd been to one in Corinth, Mississippi, and she had decided we needed to do that in Oakland. She lived pretty close to that cemetery. And so we worked on that. That was 2002. And except for a couple years with COVID, we have had that event every year. And these are some of our reenactors. We've been through some, these are later ones. Our early ones, we used kerosene lanterns, and those were awful. In fact, we almost burned my husband up trying to maintain the kerosene lanterns. But this is a good grouping. This is a fun event we had also that involved reenactors, and it was a fundraiser. Somebody asked us if we would donate something, and so we donated a ghost dinner at the Lee Kingdom building and a ghost tour of the museum. And so we developed some characters that were a little peculiar in the way that they died, or were interesting and maybe had an interesting past. And we had this cemetery walk, and minimal makeup just made them look a little gray, but it was very successful. Dinner was wonderful. Volunteers cooked all the food, and it was like a gourmet feast. And people beg us all the time to do this again. They said they will pay big bucks if we want. We need to do it, but haven't had time. So this is one of our events. And then I stopped being curator for a few years and just worked with the cemetery and cleaning the house. In fact, ever since I became curator, I've cleaned the house regularly. Mostly before our Daffodil Festival. Originally, we weren't open. We closed in November and didn't open again until March in the museum. Now we're open year round. But at that time, it'd be shut up for a while. So right before the Daffodil Festival, we'd do a really hard cleaning. And in the old days, before I had as many volunteers, it was me by myself. And it took me almost a week to clean the museum that slowly. Now I have more help, and it's a lot faster, but even when I was no longer curator, I still cleaned the house for them and worked on the cemetery. So I had some reasons for stopping. I wanted to pursue um, uh, a professional appraiser of not real property, but I mean, not real estate, but for personal articles and collections and things like that. But I just never found the time to finish that. And then in 2012, 4 years later, the Historical Society asked me if I would consider being president. And so I decided to, and we worked on a plan to develop some of the sites that the Historical Society owned that were like Civil War sites. And what we decided to develop was Fort Lookout, which is a national landmark site. We have two in Ouachita County, Poison Spring and Fort Lookout, and these are national sites that are important to the history of our country. And so the timing of that was good because the sesquicentennial was coming up. And so we worked on the Fort Lookout and the Civil War sesquicentennial. We had a committee. We did some really cool things. We did these little coins. You see a picture of both sides of that. And one of the neatest things we did was the first Kansas Colored Unit played a prominent part in that battle. And so we decided that we would hire some first Kansas Colored reenactors from Kansas and have them come and be in our battle. We were going to have it Poison Spring. And when we looked into it, it was going to cost us most of our budget. And we'd had some generous supporters, but it was still going to take half of our money just to get 5 soldiers to come. And so we decided to start our own. And we got grants for uniforms, and we were able to outfit, they're not all here in this training picture, but outfit 12 soldiers to have our own first Kansas Colored Unit. And they were really good. In fact, people, after we got that unit together, people were wanting them to come all over the state. They were in great demand. We also hired a company to help us develop Fort Lookout. And their name was Mud Puppy and Water Dog. They were working with quite a few other other communities in that area. And so we thought, well, that's good. We'll work with them. Mark Christ had recommended them, and he had worked with us quite a bit. And so they came and visited, and we gathered up the money to pay them to do that. And we had a plan. And we knew it was going to be good for tourism. And that's one reason why I have this picture here, other than the fact that these are fascinating pictures from that reenactment at Poison Spring. But if you look at that one in the bottom, at the line of people gathered on the highway, I mean, we already had the park full. And so the only place that people could come was out here on the highway. And it's a draw. It's a fascinating part of, it's not necessarily a happy time, but a fascinating part of our history in our country. And we need to know the good, the bad, the ugly. So that's what this was. And I know that there's no good thing in war, but because of this war, people were freed. And so I think we need to celebrate at least that aspect of it. But every other year for several years, we did that battle. Once our plan was developed, and the upper right-hand corner is actually a picture up on the fortifications at Fort Lookout. When Mark Christ still worked for the state, he would bring people there frequently. I got to where I kept a pair of boots in my car because sometimes he didn't bring it when you wanted to go up there because of mosquitoes and chiggers and snakes. And so, but I'd have to haul them up there and show them the fortifications. But these are the plans. The first is this vicinity plan showing the area, the Ouachita River. This site was actually called Fort Lookout because it was a fort built by the Confederates, and then it was actually even fine-tuned by the Union Army in the 11 days that they occupied Camden. during the Camden expedition. So it was a great site, really beautiful. And it had a house up there. A doctor had built a house, unfortunately, I believe, on one of the fortifications. That's what I've been told. Don't know if it's true, but for us, it was a good thing because we could retrofit it as a visitor center and already had a structure there. And the price tag for this was going to be $350,000, but we were going to do it. We were going to work on it and get it all done, and we were all excited about the benefit and the opportunity for Camden and this site. And was another thing was cool was Stephen McAteer at the Arkansas Military Museum, who, by the way, is an old Camden, grew up in Camden. Actually got his love of history from one of the prior curators. And because I'm old, I've completely forgotten her name, but he thought the world of her, and she taught him to love history. And so he got involved in it and got his degree at UALR, and then manages the Arkansas Military Museum. And he does about every 2 years, or every other year, he does a Camden Expedition bus tour. In fact, he's scheduling one for March of 2025. And these are some pictures. And during that time, we were working on a really interesting idea. It occurred to a lot of us because there were a lot of communities in South Arkansas that had battlegrounds or war sites on the Camden expedition route that General Steele traveled during the Civil War. And so it was an opportunity for all of us to group together and develop our sites and develop a partnership where we advertised, and if we had an event, we could make sure that our events were not at the same time, because of course we usually did it in April because that's when the occupation was. And so we decided we would work together. And so Mark Christ helped us organize a committee, the Camden Expedition Committee. And we developed with the help of David Fielding, who's on the left. He's a representative in South Arkansas, and he sponsored a bill. It took us actually 5 years to get this all done, but he sponsored a bill, and we were able to make it a scenic highway. And then we went to the highway department. We weren't done, and made it a scenic byway. And the governor, for the signing the bill, specifically requested that some of the First Kansas Colored would be there for a picture. And so they came. They're really sweet about donning their uniforms and coming up and celebrating with us. And so these are people from all over South Arkansas that participated in this effort. And this is the brochure that Dr. Diane Betts and I developed, that is in all the visitor information centers. This is the map with all the sites on it and the expedition, and some ancillary routes going into Washington State Park, where Steele never went there on his ill-fated Red River campaign that we call the Camden Expedition. But he did, the Army, the battle that happened down there was because they thought he was going to go there, and they were defending that area, or trying to keep him out of there. He is really headed toward Camden and what he hoped was going to be food for his soldiers. So he really wasn't interested in that route that much anyway. And this is the timeline, starting in March and ending in May of the Camden expedition, the Red River campaign. So unfortunately, also while I was president, we were looking at some problems around the house, and we found this issue over here on the left. You can see the rotten board, and we were kind of concerned about some things. You can see the ductwork over here, and there's some more here that's wrong with it. And so I called Ralph Wilcox, and he came down and visited, and he said, I think you need to write a grant and for what the things you want to fix, the visual things we can see that are wrong. And ask also to hire an architect to do a condition assessment. So we did, and it was bad news. Virtually every foundation pier, and as you can see from the bottom left-hand corner, the foundation piers and on the right, were quite creative in some spaces. But every single one of them was compromised. And so our house was, just, it was shimmed, it was patched, it was everything but good. And you'll never believe this, but the price to fix this, we hired Gary Clements, and he did an amazing plan and did all the follow-up work on it. But the price to fix it was exactly the same price it would cost to develop Fort Lookout. Unfortunately, we owned this beautiful place, and as you can see on the left, all our exterior work made it look wonderful, and we needed to fix it first before anything else. So that's what we did. And it took us probably more than 6 years to get grants enough. We phased it out, and the work was so intensive that we didn't apply for a grant every year because we couldn't get all the work done in a year. But it involved taking every bit of this central heat and air out from underneath the house and redoing the foundation and making it look historic and not, brand new, and then putting that central heat and air into the house. Everything was out of code. It was really bad. And so we were able to, I skipped that. We were able to get it all done. But the funny part was, I call this my lipstick on a pig picture, because it will look beautiful. You can see the first picture on the front of this presentation, and the museum looks gorgeous. And so I'd be going to civic clubs asking for money and support, and I'd have to tell them, I'd have to bring pictures to show them what the under part looked like and how dangerous it was, because the museum looked gorgeous. And I said, well, we just put a bunch of lipstick on a pig, and now we've got to fix the pig. But we were able to get that done this year. The final work was such a mess and also digging and underneath the house. Actually, you can see through the boards on this house in some places. It was built in 1847, so it's quite 175 years old. We celebrate that last year or year before last. I'm getting old and can't remember. Anyway, this was the work that had to be done, and once it was done, it took us a full month to put the museum back where we could have tours again. Okay, this was the last thing I actually have been involved in that I love, and it was John Wheeler, who is one of our local historians, and he and Bill Hawkins had worked together to develop a lot of our historic districts. We have quite a few in Camden, and he wanted to do a downtown one. And his partner, Bill Hawkins, that had worked with him for years, was not physically able to, so he asked me if I would work with him, and I was so excited to get involved in this. And so all this work, I worked on individual properties. I'll show you one later, but never, and that was kind of an ill-fated one too, but never gotten to do the full historic property thing. And districts are a little different than an individual property. A lot more work, I think, because there were like 50-something structures in this, but it was fascinating to, wander around inside of old buildings, things you hadn't seen, and because they're covered up and not open anymore. People use their buildings differently than we do now. And look at Sanborn maps. I kind of addicted to Sanborn maps, and who knew that they're keys in the Library of Congress? You can look them up and get keys to tell you what all those little symbols on a Sanborn map meant. But it was fascinating, and it took us quite a while. I think it took us almost 2 years to get all the work done, but we had a lot of help. If Ralph and Travis Ratterman hadn't helped me, I was a newbie and didn't know what I was doing, and they were very patient and kind and helped me, and I learned a lot, and I hope to do more of that. But these are some before and after pictures. This is when you're looking at something like this, you look to see what buildings look like. Now, this on the left-hand side that says Hotel Washita is not actually true. The interesting thing about this hotel, which the hotel part is actually under the bottom, the slip cover that is on the bottom picture. The picture above was actually behind this building. You never entered the hotel rooms through the bottom floor of the hotel part. You entered them through this little skyway you can see up on the left-hand side from the lobby slash restaurant slash ballroom. And that's what this building behind was. It's no longer there, unfortunately, but the hotel part of it is underneath all that slip covers up in the inside that building, and it's virtually just sitting there ready to be a hotel again. And then on the right-hand side, this is Bry Brothers department store. And Bry Brothers department store, it has some alterations to it from this picture that I'm showing you. The windows were altered and no longer arched before they slip covered that building, and that's the building down below. And that's another gem that's hiding up underneath that slip cover. But so these are properties that were in that downtown historic district. The one I'm showing you in the middle that has the before and after is like a Cinderella story. And this is where volunteers are so valuable to historic preservation. This building was the old Fairview Gym, one of the few buildings left standing from the old district and school district that was consolidated. Now it's Camden Fairview. And it was a really cool building. It was built by the same architect that built the men's gymnasium in Fayetteville. And when it was built, it was in the 1930s, it was the finest example of a gymnasium in the state of Arkansas. It had a swimming pool in the basement, and on the back of it, it had a 2-story classroom. So this is not a good story, but the school, the Boys and Girls Club that managed that property now had asked me to get this on the National Register. And so I did the work. Actually, I called the state people, and they said, I can't remember who it was. It was Paul, somebody that was working there said, I've driven by that building for years and wondered why somebody didn't save it. And so they did all the, I did narrative work and they did all the survey work on it. And so it was going to be considered on a Friday. And I was in an office somewhere doing some part-time work. And my husband called me and he said, Kath, I just drove by the Fairview Gym and they're tearing the back of it off. And I said, what? So I ran out there, and there were, people on the committee that had asked me to write the nomination form were out there watching them tear down the 2-story classroom from the back of that building. And I begged them to stop, and they just laughed at me, like some hysterical woman just showed up here crying, and and so anyway, I was, as you can see, I was not successful, and so the back of the building was torn off. Unfortunately, that nullified the National Register listing. And so it is actually on the Arkansas Register, and really mostly because what volunteers were able to do. Literally every single window in that building, and they're beautiful, were removed and lovingly cleaned and restored by individuals. And then they put new glass in them and put them back up. All the landscape was volunteer. They were not able to get that paint that was on there was a partial building on there, and they tore that off. It was an addition. That's the only good thing they did when they tore off the back. They tore that off too, which actually made it more back to the original. And those people actually, when they couldn't get all that paint off, hand painted each of those bricks to faux paint them to make them look like the original bricks underneath. And this is one of the most important centers in our community today. We have weddings there, we have auctions there, we have community concert series there. I mean, volunteers saved that building and made it a vital part of our community. And so there's a whole list of hundreds of people I could tell you that are volunteer preservationists in that case. So I'm no longer actually the president. I quit. I actually resigned because I didn't get to do all the fun things anymore. I was handling payroll and taxes and all kinds of things that just aren't that fun. And so I wanted to go back to the grassroots stuff. So that's what I did. I resigned. I was on the board for a lot of years, and now I'm just an advisor. And these are two of my newest projects. On the left is a cemetery, a really sweet little cemetery. The first lawyer in Camden is buried in this cemetery, and the DAR has gotten a grant to clean it up, and we've cleaned tombstones and done a lot of work around the outside of it, and we're going to mark it. We have a marker especially for the 250th anniversary, because Christopher Columbus Scott, who's buried there, his father was a Revolutionary War general, and we're marking this in honor of his ancestor, and we'll be doing that at the end of this month. And then just recently, this little house on the right came into my possession, and it's going to have to get a whole lot cooler before I can figure out what to do with it, because it's going to require a lot of work, and there's no heating and air, and it's hot out and hot in. And so, but I'm excited to see what can happen with this little project too. So, and I'm sure there's more out there, because history to me is about the stories of people who lived places. A lot of times I'm on what I call the civic club circuit. In a small town, it's hard to have programs. And so frequently when they can't find anybody else, I say, can you do a program on anything? And I can almost find some cool story to tell. So I try to help them when they want it. But that's what I think. And I'll say, how many of y'all liked history when you're in school? Well, nobody raises their hand. They all hated it because it made you memorize dates and things. But to me, that's not what history's about. Dates are a marker. So you kind of know when this happened in relation to something else. But history's about the stories of people and places in your town and Camden, which is my hometown now, and hometown of my children, several of my children. And we love it there. And by the way, this is October. Our All Hallows Eve Cemetery Walk is next Friday and Saturday. So if you don't have anything to do, you can come and have a wonderful dinner. We have amazing restaurants downtown, and then come to our cemetery walk. You'll love it, I know. And so I thank you for listening to me ramble on about how much I love Camden and all the amazing things there are there. But I have to say that, like I said, I'm an accidental preservationist, and I had volunteer preservationists help me forever and all the way through. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Great job. If you want to stop sharing, then we can look and see if we've got a few questions.
Oh,
and y'all have
I
plenty
keep
of
forgetting
time.
this is not a touchscreen. Oh.
Okay. Y'all have plenty of time to type your questions and comments for Kathy if you have any. I know there's a couple. Oh, if you will tell a little bit more about what the cemetery walk entails for people who are not familiar with cemetery walks.
Okay, cool. Well, we change the characters every year, and we used to have 2 a year because we did it during the Daffodil Festival. But we research people that are buried in that cemetery and their stories and their life, and then we get volunteers. They dress up in period clothing and they stand on that grave we have lanterns, and you can come early if you're afraid to walk in a cemetery after dark. But it's really cool. And and they tell their stories and tell you about where they've been, what they did, and it's great fun.
Thank you. Okay, let's see. There was something else. Oh, whose home is the little white house you've acquired? Do you know? Is anybody notable
Yes.
who lived there?
Well, no, not that I know of. But it was in the property, it's part of an 80-acre land grant, the original property that Thomas Woodward, who was one of our original settlers, who actually named the city of Camden, Camden. And that was part of his original downtown. Well, it wasn't down. We didn't have much of a downtown back then, but it's 80 acres in that area. Both that house and the house next door that I also own, it's in a little better shape. I didn't show you that. This one I have wanted for years because it's so cute, isn't it? And I thought, I just, plus it really it looks bad. It hurts the value of the property I already own. So I'm excited to get it fixed up. I'm worried it's going to have to be torn down. That would just break my heart. But
I don't think so. And you did not include, Kathy didn't show you all the photo of the house that she's just finishing.
yeah,
She's got
it's
another project going on right now too.
it's so cute. I love that house. And this is an interesting story. The lady, that cemetery that I just showed you, the little rock wall one, is the Scott Cemetery. And the lady who gave it to the historical society when she passed away owned this house that I bought next door to this, the one I'm gonna fit, the White House. And I went to interview her. We used to interview people about family history, and she had cancer and was terminal. And so I went to get information so that we could develop an interview and video it. And she gave me all this information. Then she got sick and we lost her before we could do it. But I fell in love with her little house. It was so cute. And so I bought it from the estate. And so I've owned it for a while, and it's families lived in it. Actually, families living in it right now, bless her heart. It's a construction zone, but she's living there. So anyway,
I think they'll both look great. I've
I
got
hope so.
confidence in you, Kathy. You got lots of nice comments. And then this is
Oh.
similar to a question I was going to post. So great. What are the best ways to find grants for historic buildings in Arkansas? And are there resources available to help in any of that process? I was going to ask you just what advice do you have for someone who's going to go after a grant for preservation?
I think the most important thing is to read all the requirements for a grant application. And I am, one of my pet peeves is last minute grant applications. And that's because if you take the time to get it done early and if the last minute you're going to throw it together, it may or may not fly. It depends on how good you are at throwing things together. I'm not. I have to get it all done. But a lot of places, if you leave off one thing, they just toss it out. They have so many applications. Why should they bother to look at one that you didn't even take time to look at the instructions? So reading the instructions is really important. And I don't have a problem with that. It's the after work, all that stuff you have to do after to justify the money they do give you, that I'm not real good at. But anyway, thanks to Gary Clements. He kind of helped us with that last one. So the last two grants, I just kind of let Gary do it. He knew what he was doing, and we were into the complex stages. And if you'd had asked me to describe what they were going to have to do in a narrative, I wouldn't have understood any of it. So anyway, but yes, I think, get to know what needs to be done. Just get very informed. You're asking people to give you money, and it's their money in or if it's a private grant, and they want to know they want to go somewhere and see that, and they want to see it done and all that you did. And, so you think about that. You're applying for it for you, but you need to do your application like you're applying for it for them to make them happy. And does that
Yes.
answer your question, or did I
Yes, you
hardball?
answered my question. And the other part of it, it's Matt
Was
Martin.
where?
It's your friend
Well,
Matt Martin.
yeah,
That yes, these grants are available through our state historic preservation office, and
yes,
I'd be glad to help you
they
or answer any
will.
questions.
But I want to point out that if you're an individual, you can't get grants on a historic property. They're for nonprofits. And so you buy a historic property, you have to, there's only one grant that's available through Arkansas Historic Preservation for a nonprofit. Now, there may be some through the National Trust, but for somebody that's an individual, for a particularly an individual that owns a good historic property. But for us, for the state, if you have a property that is non-contributing in a district, in a historic district, there's something that can be done to it to make it contributing. For example, we have a structure in downtown Camden that the past owner took off some original siding on the front of it. It was there were a group of picture of buildings, and when the last building on the end was built, they put this green glass facade, and it was original to the building on the end, but not to the others. So the owner tore off all of it. Well, on the other ones, it just exposed the original brick, which is great. But on this end property, it exposed ugly poles and metal beams. So it's not contributing in that district, but that material is available and could be, you could get a grant up to $10,000 to buy that material and put it back on there and then reapply, and it could be contributing. But before you did, of course, you would apply for the grant. So they would say, yes, that would make it contributing. That's the only grant available to not a nonprofit. The rest is tax credits, and they're amazing. And in Camden, we are lucky because our population is lower and the state tax credits are a higher percentage in our area than they are in Little Rock even. And so that's a great resource. But you gotta find somebody who knows what they're doing. And there are several people who do that professionally, and it's worth it to pay them. Financially, it's worth it.
I agree. And you've got lots of districts, and now that commercial district people are gonna be able to benefit from the tax credit.
I know. We've got there is a building they're working on right now. And then we've got some new owners that I gave them all that information, but somebody will be there to help you. The state office, they've been so great to me. I mean, I'm a dummy and they've helped me. They've pulled me out of a lot of fires. And they're nice about it. They're overworked and underpaid, but take them cookies. I'm just kidding.
There's a question. Well, yeah, it never hurts. Somebody asking about your recommendations for tax credit help.
I locally, the one I know is Amber Carter Jones, and she's really good. She's working with our young man in Camden that owns a couple. He owns he owns a block, actually. He owns a block that's in that district, but he has one that's contributing. It's the old Strand Theater, and he's going to do apartments upstairs and retail down below, and she's helping him with it.
Yes, thank you. Okay, you have lots of nice comments that I'll send to you after the fact. And one final question for me. I mean, you didn't even talk about your advocacy work, or Kathy could, y'all, this presentation could go on and on and on. And everybody has said things to that effect of how much they appreciate you and all the things you've done.
Really sweet. I gotta tell you, I've had all the fun. Advocacy, if you want to have a good time, go with Rachel to Washington, D.C.
We did have a good time.
I'm cleaning my computer while I'm working on this program, and I found these wonderful things that when we did virtual advocacy during COVID, she did these wonderful case studies, and they're like, oh my gosh, they're an advertisement for tax credits and for you know, why the federal government should support what we do in preservation. And I didn't delete them, Rachel. I had to save them just in case I could ever use them.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
You gotta show good photos, good before and
Yeah.
after photos.
I know, I love photos.
Mhm. Absolutely. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. And Kathy, thank you again.
You're welcome.
You did a great job, and thank you for being part of Women in Preservation. And we'll see everybody next month for Liz Norton's talk.
Oh, yeah, I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, that'll be good.